Welcome along to the Fly Culture Podcast with me, Pete Tigers. The weather still sucks, but I seem to be holding off with the fishing withdrawal symptoms at the moment. And if you follow my socials, you know I plan hitting the road with my new VW van. I've had fun figuring out where I'm going to store things and if I'm brave enough to try and camp out in January. We'll see. Right, on to my guest. The word legend is used far too readily these days, but in this case it is wholly appropriate. He's a guide, casting instructor, great company, and ran a fly shop in Bakewell that was a must-visit venue if you were in town. I'm pleased to be joined by Peter Arfield. Peter, I know we've been trying to set this up for well over a year, but we got there at last. How are you doing?
I'm reasonable, thank you, and good morning to you. I've been a bit under the weather this last few months, and I've not, in fairness, been out with a rod often. I've guided a couple of people, and sort of on a friendly basis. It's difficult to guide friends, actually. People sometimes say, I suppose as a guide you get lots of fishing in for yourself. And the truth is, when you are guiding, as I'm sure you've found, guiding is a bit like fishing for yourself, only with a broken rod. And if we, and I try to avoid guiding my friends, because it's a bit like trying to teach a family member how to drive a car. It's often not successful, and you can end up ruining a good friendship. I'm not sure why that should be. But anyway, I've been out a couple of times. Yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah, it is. It's a really difficult one because you want to help your friend. And it's kind of, even when you just go fishing with friends, since I've not been guiding, it's so much easier and I don't have to be so polite and I can take a nice spot if I want to. But even when you're, and let's use the term off duty, you still are sort of in semi-guide mode, either whether you know it or not, aren't you?
That's exactly right. Yes, that's exactly right. And I think if you're not actually being paid to open your mouth about things, I think it can sound a bit patronising. And it's, yeah, anyway, so. And it all goes wrong when your pals outfish you anyway.
Yeah. And do you find those sort of situations where you're sitting watching your friend? I don't know if you fish when you're fishing with friends, if you fish together or you split up, but when you're together, you're sort of kind of thinking, I think you need to change that fly, or you need to get a little bit more slack in your line, and you're trying desperately hard not to say it, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. Yeah. And also, it can kind of spoil your own fishing. You're trying to get out of guide mode and just concentrate on doing what you do. It's not easy. I've been out a couple of times with a lady who we lost a well-known figure in British angling last year, as you know, and I sort of I've made friends with his fiancée as was, and she's a keen angler. She's not been doing it for so long, but she's a keen angler, and I've been out with her a couple of times. But it's been more. It's not being paid in any way. It's been out of friendship. We're sharing similar experiences by the river, and we haven't have fly rods in our hands, sort of thing. But she's catching fish. She's catching fish, and I think she's a good angler in there. Like a lot of cases, I think women make better anglers than blokes a lot of time, particularly for when they're learning to cast. I'd rather have a woman as a student caster than a bloke, for sure.
Why is that?
I think they haven't got a sort of folk memory of my grandpappy told me to do this. And if you tell them not to hold the rod as tightly as they are doing, then they tend just to instinctively develop a nice feel for it. If you tell a bloke to relax, you can see his knuckles turning white. And I tell most of my students, particularly when they're using a bamboo rod, that they're casting like a blacksmith with the monk on. You really are giving it too much welly. But yeah, and I sometimes use humour to try and get people to relax. And it can be a two-edged sword, really. I remember many years ago, a bloke asked me to help him tune up with his casting. He was about to take retirement and he wanted a bit of tune-up. And when this chap came in the shop, he got like the Jasper Carrot accent, which to us is like a comedy accent. Oh, hello, I'm from down there, I'm a Jasper Carrot, you know? And to us, or to many people, that accent is like a comedy accent, isn't it? It seems to assume that the people aren't very bright. God help me for saying that, but it's true. It's just one of those things. So I'm out with this chap, and damn my rags, he was very quick indeed to learn. He was very quick. He didn't need, there wasn't much wrong with him actually, but I mean, he was double hauling in an hour, quite nicely too. And it turned out this bloke with the accent, who was a doctor, for God's sake. You don't associate doctors with having a Jasper Carrot accent. He sounded a bit funny. Anyway, I did make a suggestion that he was perhaps holding the rod a bit too tight during his casting stroke. And I suggested he perhaps try holding the rod like he might a sensitive portion of his partner's anatomy. And he said, oh, like the wife's purse. Which I thought, not a bad answer, that. But anyway, yeah, ladies tend to be better students than fellas do, for sure. Yeah. Where was I?
What do you prefer? Is it guiding or instruction or a combination of both?
It's hard to separate the two. I think there's instruction stroke guiding, which is what I suspect that most British guides do. You know, if you go out practicing your casting on a bit of well-mown grass somewhere, then that is definitely instructing. But if you go out on a river somewhere, you are both guiding and instruction in so much you're trying to find somewhere to put the instruction into good use, i.e. find a damn rising fish. But sometimes rising fish, they've not always read the right books, have they? They've not read the right books and they go and hide for an hour or so on general principles. One of the problems that I've come across when guiding is that, I mean, I'm not a big chap, but quite a few of the chaps who come, they're like big beefy blokes, fed up on, big lunches and rugby at school, that sort of thing. And a lot of people do not have the ability to be able to kneel down. And if we're on the Derbyshire Y particularly, being able to kneel down and keep a low profile is just about 100% needed for most of those fish. I see a lot of people over the years, and granted, they're not professional anglers. I mean, they're probably doctors and big swinging corporate lawyers or whatever they are, but they very much treat the occasion as a social occasion, which is fine. But they tend to stand bolt upright on a high bank with the sun behind them, with flashy rods and white Panama hats, going hello, hello, hello to each other. But this is fine. But when they wander up down the river, and I'm with a client trying to catch a fish, they're spooking fish from 30 and 40 yards away, and probably more than that. And sometimes I'll see them the next day. They come in the shop and they say, I'm trying not to sound inversely snobbish here, but they come and say, oh, there's any damn fish in the river, personally, old boy. And the thing is, they, 3 Range Rover fulls of a fish for 3 full days in mayfly season, caught 1 fish between them, and that was a fluke. The concealment is essential, and some people just don't recognise that fact. I tell them if they stand on a high bank with the sun behind them on mayfly time in the evening, they're unlikely to catch any fish, no matter how decent a sort of chap they may be. So it can be frustrating sometimes as a guide, yeah. Still, most of them manage something somehow.
Good. Well, that's good to hear. And you mentioned the Derbyshire Wye there and a little bit about it. And for listeners, I'd love you to tell us a little about the Derbyshire Wye. And what I'm really interested in is what the Derbyshire Wye means to you, Peter.
Well, I do recall back in the day, and it was back in the day, that myself and my pal Wade Biggin in Sheffield, good workmate, we used to save up for a day ticket on the Derbyshire Wye once a year. We used to have to catch the bus, 2 buses in fact. What was it, 3? 2 or 3, or whatever banger of a vehicle we got running at the time. And we used to get our day tickets from the Rutland Hotel in the middle of Bakewell. Of course, we're just a couple of strokes from God knows where. My pal once turned up in his work overalls to try and keep the nettles off him. So there we were. I don't think anybody had the tickets checked more often or more frequently than us two. But we loved it. And in those days, I can't quite remember what a ticket cost. I think it was something like, might have been 11 or 12 pounds or something. It probably priced in guineas in those days. And we were allowed to take fish. I think the limit was something that we had to look up. The limit was 3 brace of fish. Or was it 2 leash? 2 leash of fish we were allowed to take. And I recall the river being full of weed and full of trout. Although we were very much novices, we somehow got the knack of casting them, We were on home-built fiberglass rods for the most part. And it was a great training ground for us because we got like a coarse fishing background, but we kind of sussed that. I used to call my moment of revelation was that I figured if I wasn't catching, this is to a pod full of rising fish. If I spooked them, I didn't catch them. But if I made what I called a bad cast, bless you, if I made a bad cast, the fly would drag more naturally or drift more naturally. And it was that what we would now call the drag-free drift with a small fly seemed to catch fish. And lo and behold, we were sort of catching fish when grown-ups weren't doing so. So that was a bit of a moment. I remember one particular time fishing, there's a part of what we call Scott's Garden. There's 2 little wicket gates because the path goes right between the river and a high stone wall. And I was fishing there one summer's afternoon with my fly, and I figured that the road behind me would be where my level of where my feet were. And of course, it's not. The rope was at shoulder height, but I didn't suss that. I think you call it a lack of situational awareness. And I'm trying to catch these damn fish. I look behind. To my horror, there's this dear little old lady. And you know how when you get older, you get these wattles hanging down, yeah? I'd rather neatly hooked her with me double badger down through one of the wattles. So I dropped me rod, ran round, scooted on, said, got me force her. Don't worry, missus, I'll get it for you. And I got only double, but I think God I was using barbless even then, and just held it up very briefly. Yeah, I've killed it for you. It was a big bumblebee. So we now call it Old Lady Bend, as you would do. Yeah. It's funny what you can catch if you don't pay attention. I once hooked an old cement wagon on my back. But anyway, yeah, it was back in the day, and I would never have dreamt that one day I'd actually be running a tackle shop in the middle of town. It just not even a dream, not even a dream of a dream. But funny how things work out, really. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely, and it's a wonderful start to it. What we're hearing about, and how your love affair with the Y began, and did that develop some more? Then that you were going there as youngsters, and then the river really got under your skin, and you ended up spending so much time there, and you realised this is where I want to be.
Yeah, well, it did happen, but not so much on the Y in the early days because I couldn't afford it. It was probably £10 or £12 a day and a journey and all the rest of it. Where I learned what skills I have mostly was on a little Sheffield river near where I lived called, there was the Rivlin and the Loxley. But I fished those rivers with my little cane rod or my little fiberglass rod, whatever I got. And I looked upon those as practice for when I did get on the Y. I used to fish down the Peacock Stretch. And when I got a car, I used to fish the Monsaldale Stretch as well. That 3/4 of a mile at Monsaldale, presided over by a gentleman who even in those days was known as Old Tom, rest his soul. Did you ever meet him? Was he before your time? Old Tom, yeah. Yes, he was
I think he might have been before me. Yeah, it might have been before me.
He was a character, proper old school. But as things developed, I used to be able to, I was granted the grace to take people guiding up there a few times as well. Back in the early days at the shop, it was very nice. But I found myself at the forefront of the battle against the members of the community with no fixed abode, shall we say. And they used to pester us day after day in the shop on the lines of, have you got any big hooks, mate? A bit of heavy line. They used to pester us. And I found myself in the forefront against that particular battle. I'm wandering and diverting a bit, but on that same subject, I remember once what a bloke normally described as a big Cockney guy came in, and if you were casting a film for Central Casting, you'd have put him up front and centre. Big bloke, hairy chest, suntan sort of face, lots of jewellery round his neck, And he came in, no, I'm living in the big arse and I want to get some fish out in the river, mate, bobbing his head about, And big hooks and thick line. And I think we had a full and frank exchange of views. And off he went. I never heard nothing like that before. A couple of days later, Warren, the keeper, came and he said, hey, Pete, did you did you refuse a big cockney bloke some line and hooks, thinking he were poaching? I said, yeah. He said, that's the Duke's granddaughter's fiancé. And he really was. So, anyway, probably looking out to get beheaded for that, but I did it in all honesty.
Yeah, that's your royal warrant gone, I guess,
Very
isn't
much so, yeah. Anyway, he had to smile as he said it.
it? Did you notice then, fishing those streams in Yorkshire, the difference between those more sort of spatey freestone rivers comparable to the limestone that you were fishing on the Wye? You said that they were a good practice ground for you, but did you pick up quickly the difference between the two?
I'd like to say yes, but it was a slow process. I found on the small rivers, your choice of fly wasn't so important. And your stealthy approach was important, but they weren't that fussy about what fly you put on. Just occasionally you'd find them super fussy. It's only a couple of years ago I got my backside well and truly thrashed on one of the rivers. Fish were hopping about all over this pool, which I've been fishing since the 1970s, and I could not catch these fish. So I eventually managed to scoop out what I thought was a flotsam of dust, but it turned out to be something I showed to Don Staziker, who in turn showed it to Skippy. So that's Stuart Crofts, anybody who doesn't know him. And the answer came back that they were thrips. These things, microscopic water bodies which could literally hop about on the water. And they were smaller than any hook I've ever seen or known to mankind, I suspect. So, it does happen sometimes. Anyway, every day's a school day. But the difference between they did seem fussier on the limestone rivers, very much so. They were often more picky as to the size, shape, type of fly, pretty much as you'd expect, really. Spinner patterns in the evening seem to be more important. Not so much on the little rivers. I sort of get the impression that dusk falls prematurely on little tree-strewn rivers, doesn't it? And maybe if I'd have been there at 2:00 in the morning, it would have been different. But the spinners seemed more important. They're more of an evening rise on the limestone river on the Wye. Interesting, really. And of course, the Wye being dry fly only made me learn dry fly skills more than nymphing skills. Yeah, interesting.
And did you find that you were fishing these streams, and did fly tying come into that for you then as well?
Yeah,
That you were putting together kit that suited both the streams in Yorkshire and the Y2?
yeah, I did. Yeah, I don't underestimate the value of a double badger or a grey duster, I would say. They cover a lot of sins, don't they? Lot of sins. And there was a time when I was fishing very, very long leaders. With no sort of YouTube prior to whenever the YouTube came out. So mostly it was books. And the value of a long leader, there was a definite point where a long leader rose me more fish, but hooked fewer of them. So the value of a well-greased butt end on a leader was apparent. So I was raising zillions of fish, but quite unable to hook the damn things. And tin of muslin earned its place. I wouldn't go fishing without my tin of muslin nowadays. I'm not unique in finding that by any means. Yeah, there were some good books about then. There's still some good books about now. I'm rereading Mike Weaver's book at the moment somewhere, wherever it is. And I think Mr. Smith sent me a complimentary copy, which was good of him. So I'm rereading that with some pleasure. So I usually find that textbooks are textbooks about 10 years after you've read them. Very often. Do you find that?
Yeah. Absolutely, and I shout loudly about Mike's book on there as well, and you've drawn it into a really interesting question for me. And you said about reading the books, and it comparable to then to now, say for example, because there's so much media for us to be able to consume if we want to. Do you think we're making things overly complicated? Because I'm thinking about what you said about fly patterns as well. So do you think we're sometimes in danger of making things too complicated because there's so much information around?
Quite possibly. I've seen one or two characters on the YouTube who, to be honest, shouldn't really be doing casting lessons on the YouTube. But having said that, I've seen a lot of really first-class casting videos on the YouTube, really first class, by first-class chaps, but they make the mistake of not making sure that their fly line is visible. So that's a bit of a problem. And I think for the novice angler, you can be watching half a dozen videos from world-class casting instructors, but they can't see the novice. And most of us have got a slightly idiosyncratic style of casting. And no matter how good a casting instructor is, he can't see you casting how you're casting. So it's interest declared. I do think it's very much worthwhile for the novice to have some professional casting instruction rather than have his mate of a mate taking him out. Very important, that. And I think App Guy and more likely AAP Guy members who can all cast and fish have played the part in that. I think the quality of the fly casting that you see, particularly on still water, seems to have improved greatly these past few years.
It's an interesting point that you make about the casting, because I'm obviously from the same camp as you and think there is nothing better than someone standing next to you. But even latterly, when I was starting to wind down teaching people, because of the likes of YouTube, that people were turning up with a really good basic understanding of how to learn to cast. And like you say, if you were picking up a double hander for the first time, for example, that you could learn a number of casts via YouTube. Like I say, there's nothing better than somebody standing next to you, but you can easily pick those things up. And I was talking to my friend Brett the other day about this and said, if I wanted to learn to change the front light on my car, the first thing I'd do is go onto YouTube and learn how to do that. And I think there is more of that. And I wonder if that is why also that you say that, people are a lot better than when they first came to you. And, I know when people are reading books or articles and things like that, that there wasn't so much, you could notice the things that were going wrong immediately. Yet, with people being able to watch things, and it's a great way to learn, isn't it, by watching somebody as well. Even better if they're standing next to you, but it's a great way to do it. But also from a fishing perspective, and like you were saying about the long leaders and greasing the butt of the leader up so it lifts better, but that allows so much content out there that it can lead to confusion. And like you said, with fly patterns, for example, the grey duster or double badger, and I use double badgers down here as well because they work really, really well. But then you suddenly feel like you might see a video and somebody needs 50,000 different flies in their box. And so it makes what intrinsically is a really simple pastime. We're trying not to spook a fish. We're trying to cover it and then hopefully figure out what it's eating, cast to it, and perhaps if we're really lucky, catching it. Do you think there is a bit of an overcomplication with that happening from a
Yeah,
fishing
I
perspective?
think that's right. It probably stems from the competitive angling scene. You see guys on the river and they can fish. There's no doubt about that. I wouldn't decry it. Fish better than I can. But, they drop down that chest pipe and they've got like 1,000 flies all neatly laid out by weight and by colour and by size. Most, especially on the nymph side, they've got a lot of different coloured nymphs there. They're all much the same, just variations on a theme. And I'm not a competitive angler, but talking to one or two of them, what they're trying to do is to show the fish something different to what the bloke before him has just caught on. And I'm willing to learn, and I have pinched some techniques and patterns from the competitive game angling scene, respect to them, but I'm still not sure that I approve of it. Moving on to a pool, trying to catch everything with a fin, some of them barely out the egg sac. Every single thing with a fin in a pool has been caught twice over, so that when you move on, the bloke following you up hasn't got a prayer to catch. It doesn't sit right with me that it doesn't feel like proper sporting angling to me. As I say, I'll pinch the techniques, but I am slightly disapproving of it all. Using fish as tokens of one's masculinity, sort of dick measuring in a different world, it doesn't sit quite right with me.
And so for me, I think that, yes, there are these techniques that we can use, but I'm always reminded of Lee Wolf's quote that fish deserve the sanctity of deeper water.
Yeah,
And we're allowed to reach fish in just about any pool now, aren't we?
yeah, just about, certainly. Yeah, the deep pools are not a sanctuary anymore, are they? Depth of water isn't a sanctuary. But particularly modern nymphing techniques, they really can get down and sort good fish out. And using indicators, I'm sure it's not new. Anglers have been using the top dropper as an indicator for centuries, haven't they? But using a bit of foam or a bit of plastic or a bit of yarn, I've got to admit, I do it myself on occasions, but I'm not quite sure that it's proper fly fishing. Yeah, sure. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Funnily enough, I've gone back to just a nymph and watching the leader,
Yeah.
and it's been really good fun to do that. And we know these Euro nymphing techniques are fabulous and work fabulously well because you are so tight with the line. The slightest little touch,
Yeah.
particularly from a grayling, is going to be registered really, really well. And I've said on here many times before that I've seen people just fishing a duo on the rivers where they're allowed to fish them and catching fish, but very often not because those takes are not being registered. But to me, and it is each to their own, like we've said, that fishing what suits you, what works for you, what you enjoy, and it is the reason we do it is for enjoyment, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. That's got to be right. Yeah, the why where I do a fair bit of guiding is dry fly only, of course. That's from the Peacock Hotel. And I'm sure you know this. It was the dry fly rule was put onto the Y. It was the first river to have a dry rule put on it. I'm sure you know that story. That was James Ogden, who stayed at the Peacock, and he was invited by Mr. Nesbitt, I think, who was the Duke's river keeper, who was invited to give a demonstration of his newfangled dry fly fishing. This was in June 1865. And he ended up in front of the Bakewell Bridge by special permission, given permission to wade in the river. the local anglers there were there largely to mock him. This newfangled method which should never work on here. But he fished ashore. He never claimed to have invented the dry fly, but as far as we can tell, he was the first published British angler, by which of course we mean the world, to put the words, "I made my fly float." He tied his flies to float deliberately, and he used a treated silk line and a shorter rod than would most anglers were using, so he could cast his line off his reel. He didn't claim to invent it, but he was the first one to, we think he was the first one to use the words "a dry fly," a floating fly. Well, according to his own words, he was given permission to fish this fly, and he was being mocked by the locals. And he caught 8 fish. His 9th fish, however, ran between his legs, and he got tangled up in a weed bed trying to get the fish and the fly line. Oh God, oh God, oh God. And face planted himself in the river, to the great amusement of the onlookers. One of them who cried out, "It's a good job thus fell in, otherwise they'd have caught every fish in river." A great amusement. He set 2 precedents there, how difficult it can be to be a fly casting demonstrator and not look a prat. There's a fine line between those, as I'm sure we've all discovered. Anyway, the day after they made it a dry fly only rule on the river, which was interesting. The keeper liked it because he saw it as a way of protecting his best fish during the mayfly period. And it's a rule that stays with us nowadays, which is a traditional. It's the first river in the world to be made dry fly. And if you want to Google up popular subjects on Google, there's a couple of obvious big subjects, most Google terms, and the 2 obvious ones at the top of the list, and dry fly fishing is probably about number 3 or something. So that was, it's a big historical thing. And a good few years ago now, a chap wandered in the shop and he said, "You know something a little bit about old cane rods. Could you tell me about what I've got? And are they worth anything?" And I said, "Well, you can buy old cane rods from a car boot, 2 for a tenner, probably 2 for a fiver if you haggle. But if they've got a name on them and a bit of history, they can be worth, a fair amount of money, really." He said, "Well, this name on this rod, I've never heard of it. This rod's called, he says it's an Ogden." He says it's Ogden. And I said, "No, is it really?" I said, "Well, bring it in, I'll have a look at it." And he brought this rod in, and I looked at it, and I thought, could this rod be possibly the rod? Possibly. And I said, how did you get hold of this? I said, "This Ogden, this James Ogden," it says on the rod, it's a big name, really. Well, how could you get by it? And he said, "Well, it was something like his uncle or his granddad or some name like that." He said, "It's been passed down to me. My relative was, he was a secretary of a now defunct fishing club or group, and it was passed on to him along with the club memberships and the minutes, as manners are in clubs. Here's the constitution and here's the rules of the committee." And this rod had been passed down as an item of significance and to be looked after. And he said all the books and things got chucked in the skip. I just thought this might be worth something to somebody. Do you know anything about it? So I told him the story I was on about to. And I said, he says, oh, well, do you want to buy it? I said, yes, but what I don't know is how to put a price on it. He says, well, my mate's invited me to go spinning for salmon. So I said, well, how about a rod for a rod? So I swapped him a straight swap, a Hardy Deluxe salmon spinning rod, not a cheap item. And I got the rod, and I've consequently found out through a bloke called Richard Ward, who's got a Multimid Parvo, one of Ogden's famous split cane rods. He said, well, this is green art, and Ogden started using split cane in 1871. So this rod must predate that. And it's been kept in Derbyshire as an item of, you see where I'm going with this, it's survived world wars, recessions, general strikes, all sorts of things. And now it's not ended up being chucked on back at fire by some irate housewife over the centuries. Is remarkable, but it exists. And it's now on display in a proper cabinet. I'll tell you where it's on display. Malin and Green's in Bakewell, where people can go and see the rod. It's a light rod. It's a spliced joint. It's a lovely rod. It's a nice action. You could feel that you could actually cast with it today. There's been a year, not as an old rod. Felt a nice rod, really nice rattan handle. And we think it is the rod which Ogden used on July the 5th, I think, 1865, to cast a dry mayfly on the Wye. And it's every year for years now, the Peacock Club members have raised a glass to Ogden's rod, sort of things. It's a nice thing to have. But I've told them if I run out of money, I shall want the bugger back.
Wow. Yeah, that's an amazing story. And thank you for sharing that with us. And there's a couple of things that you've touched on that I'd love to ask you about. I think I'd probably be lynched if I didn't ask you about your wonderful fishing tackle shop, because it is legendary. And I wonder if you could tell me how it came about and how you enjoyed that process as well.
It wasn't my idea. It was the brainchild of a bloke called Chris Lee. And I remember I was fishing with him on the River Dove, Sheffield and Trout District anglers on the River Dove. And I say that Chris Lee is one of the finest natural fly anglers I've ever fished with in my life. Exceptionally talented bloke. In the way he got that knack of doing the simple thing and making it work. I remember back in the days we were trying to make videos, and I don't know what ended with it, but Chris rented one of those, probably half-inched for the day, one of those big cam cameras that you had to hold on your shoulder, back in the day. And we did a film on the Derbyshire, on the Dove, down the Staffordshire. He said, you know what, there ought to be a tackle shop in Bakewell. There used to be one. He said, it's wide open for us. There ought to be a tackle shop. Well, yeah. He said, yeah. There's a little shop coming free, and I'm going to inquire about it. Made to my uncle's. And I'm going to inquire about it. It's only a small place, little tackle shop. Would you come in it with me? I went, anyway, couple of weeks later, I was cavern guiding at the time. I was between jobs, shall we say. I was cavern guiding. He was waiting for me at top of the stairs. He said, "Pete, I've got this shot. Come and look at this shot. Come and look at my shot. I want someone to run it for me." So, I can't run a business. I've never run a business. He said, "Come on, go and be my manager," he said. And this will be, trying to put a date on it. I know that we bought out a catalogue in 89. So I will put it to be a year, maybe 2 years before then, so about 87, that sort of time. Which, when I talk to most people, we tend to think as the 80s and the early 90s being 20 odd years ago. However, they weren't 20 odd years ago. To my astonishment, it's more than that, isn't it? It's like 40 years ago, at me vitals. But we opened up the shop, and it was mostly word of mouth that shot round. Chris had got relatives. He said he'd got relatives in America, and he made a couple of trips a couple of times a year. And I suspect he maxed his Amex card out on coming back with armfuls of tackle from companies like, he got some Sage rods, he got some Winston rods and some Scott rods, still a favourite of mine, and gadgets from LL Bean, armfuls of stuff. God knows how he got them through customs, but he did. And the pound and the dollar thing was very much in our favour back in the day. And we were pretty much swamped by demand. And of course, those days, a 9 foot for a 4 rod from Mr. Winston was an unparalleled item to have. Nobody was making 9 foot for a foot weight rod with such gorgeous finish. And Mr. Bob Church was said nobody will buy a £200 rod in this country. However, a lot of people will buy a £200 rod. It turned out river fishing for the most part. River fishing. And we built a better mousetrap. And it's then that it occurred to me, I was wittering on about casting on rivers. One or two people were asking about tuition, and we sort of cross-hired one or two app guy members. One of them was Louis Noble, who came across and gave a couple of lessons to our customers. And I sought his advice about becoming a member myself. And he encouraged me to apply for it. And I also sought advice from my mentor then, was a chap called Vic Knight. You probably know Vic Knight, don't you? Yeah, yes, you're nodding and smiling.
Very well, yes.
Vic Knight, yes. Man with the body of a god. It's Buddha, but he is a body of a god. Fantastic. I remember him once. I was having difficulties with the rollcast, and you remember saying, "Peter, just when you're doing the rollcast, just ease your body weight forward slightly." And then Vic eased his body weight forward slightly. There's a difference between me doing it and him doing it. I think it probably disrupted the space-time continuum with what a man, what a cast. What a cast of ignited, God Almighty. And what a fisherman, too. I remember we were at an App Guy conference in Welsh Wales one time, some years ago, and I had the honour to be asked to do a little demonstration there. I got the hula hoops out, and you know the side casting trick when you cast over targets backwards and forth. Greatly daring. I should have attempted it, really, in front of such an audience. Greatly tempted. I tried to put a loop of fly line through somebody holding a hula, or don't try that without practicing. Get away. And it went through like a dream. Couldn't have gone better. Dropped lucky with it. Anyway, later on, after the demos, people were going down for individual a casting demo on the river. This was on grass. And one bloke, Vic, was trudging his way down to the river with that steady, inexorable tread of his. And one of his mates picked up one. Can I pick your hoop up? Very respectful. I said, yeah, sure. And he held this hoop up. And I would say, can't have been less than 25. And he probably 30 yards away from Vic. And he said, now then, Vic, I bet you can't cast that through here from this. And Vic looked up. He stripped some line off. He stripped some more line off and a bit more. Looked up, picked this line up and put a loop through this velvet flat hula hoop. It went through like a dart, straight through the middle, and took some line after it. And his pal said, oh, no, man, I can't do that again. Pulled it in and did it again. Fantastic cast. Unbelievable cast. God almighty. I thought I'm going to keep my mouth shut about casting in front of these blokes. These blokes can cast. Wow. Yeah. But it's an interesting thing being a casting instructor. And I think it's safe to say that assessment is quite a nerve-wracking thing to do. Do you agree?
100%. You'll know him incredibly well. I had Carl Humphreys, who's been on
Yes.
here when I did a live podcast, and Griffiths as well.
Yes.
And Icted I just spoke to the other day, funnily enough.
Oh.
And it was a nerve-wracking one. I was doing it up at Kenmore on the Tay, and there was some lad, and I was a little nervous doing the casting thing, and then some lad started throwing stones at my rod tube to make a great noise. And I said to him, dude, look, I'm doing my exam. I'm doing an exam. Give us a break here now. And I managed to get through that, which was fantastic. And I remember Carl walking over and just out the side of his mouth said, yeah, you walked that one, mate, it was a complete relief to be able to do it. That was I think it's 20 years ago now. So it's quite a long time ago now for me. But I remember it fondly, and learnt a lot and met some wonderful people along the way as well. And like you say, the people that you mentioned there, and I'm sure the shop was probably a meeting point for some of those folk as well, if they were in town fishing, or generally the public. I know when Emma and I think I first went to your shop, it must have been the mid-90s actually, with my friend Ray, really? And we were fishing the Wye. And we dropped in. He I think knew you and dragged me into the shop. And we bought some bits and pieces as we went along there. And then latterly, a few years back, Emma and I dropped in, and it was really a meeting point for anglers as well, just to hopefully buy some stuff from your standpoint, but also just to be there and be part of what you'd created, which extended way beyond selling flies, lines, rods, and everything else. It became much more than that, didn't it?
I think it did. I found myself, I don't know why, I seem to have a knack for it somehow. And this sounds like self-praise, I think, but I think somebody said that I usually tell people straight, the straight stuff. I saw a lot of examples of where people have bought tackle from other shops or online as increasingly became apparent, and they got the line on the reel the wrong way round. That's something, or they've been sold an 8-weight line on a 4-weight rod for distance or some crappy thing like that. And there's quite a few people came in that they got unsuitable tackle, and of course I had to allow for the fact that tackle, if a salesman, if a shop owner says it's unsuitable, you want one of these, it sounds like a sales ploy, doesn't it? But I was never any good at fibbing, so what I told him was the straight truth, and I stuck by what I said. And it served me pretty well, really. I had contact with people. There was a guy who ran the shop for a while. I have to pick my words here. In between Chris leaving and this other chap taking over and running it his way, and then me retaking it back over. Shall we say he was economical with the truth, shall we say? But I'm going to be careful what I say there, because he might still be around to us. Yeah, those blokes. I remember him bollocking me one time. I didn't last with him long. At all. Peter, he said, when blokes go in shop, don't fanny about talking about having a cup of tea and a fag at bottom of centre out what's actually. Take the money off them. And get them off and gone to the next bloke. And I said, well, I think some of the blokes who come in this shop aren't coming in the shop to buy tackle. They're coming for a bit of a chat and a break from it or whatever they're going in for. And they do want a cup of coffee and a chat. And and that's what local anglers, and maybe next time he'll remember us when he wants a rod. And I remember a couple of times, 2 or 3 occasions, people had come in the shop, and it sounds a bit dark, this, but they'd come in the shop, and we'd had a conversation, and sort of, if you let it, the conversation drifted around to the effects of chemotherapy versus radiotherapy. And then it'd drift round to somebody saying how much would enjoy fishing and coming in shop. And it was sort of stiff upper lip time, And I knew and they knew that they come to say bye. They wandered off into darkness down those little stone stairs. And I thought, when Orvis opened the other shop in Bakewell, they were good enough to say, Pete, we're opening a full-range shop in Bakewell. They wanted me to go and work there. I felt like I'd been hit on the back of the legs by a baseball bat. I could feel my legs being cut underneath me. And I very, very, very nearly went to work for them. And it was Christmas time. And I thought, well, if they're opening round the corner from me, I'm going to be outright in Sainsbury's car park. I am going to be screwed as a tackle shop. I'm not going to last 10 minutes. But then I thought, well, at least I'm here. And there's not many shops where blokes have come to say, farewell to. So there must be something special here for blokes to do. And I never tried to create a shop like that. It just kind of seemed to happen, And so I decided to stay, plough my own canoe. I'm glad I did, really, as it happened. I'm glad I did. Malin and Greens. It's not a full Orvis shop, but the whole empire seemed to switch down, didn't it, overnight? Was it the new bloke took over and shut down 25 shops? Yeah, a bit of a great shame for the people who worked there, because they did have some great employees. They got some awkward buggers as well, but they did have some great employees.
I wanted to move on just a little bit because you talked about cane and bamboo rods as well. And of course, it would be very rude of me not to talk about the bamboo rods that you're involved with, and having cast them and had a go. I kind of know a little bit about them. But do you want to tell listeners about them too?
Well, it was a few years ago now, a good few years ago. This chap rather shyly came in the shop and he said, you won't remember me, but you sold me the master's guide to bamboo fly rod making, the Garrison book, the one with the little segments of split cane set into the, the one. And he said, I bought it from you 20 years ago and I've been practicing. Would you have a look at this rod to give me your opinion? And I looked at it and I said, well, subject to casting, yeah, I think it's one of the nicest cane rods I've ever seen in my life. It's lovely. I knew a little tiny bit about cane rods because back in 80-something, I bought a bamboo rod from Mike Brooks before he went over to France. He had the Silk Line fame. So I bought a Mike Brooks rod. Anyway, I had a cast and I made friends with this chap and he asked me, would I consider carrying his cane rods in the shop? And as we were talking about it, a chap came through the door and said, I don't suppose you carry cane rods in your shop, do you? Completely like it to be scripted, And we set off from there and we called them the limestone rods. We're in a sort of loose partnership. Richard is too shy to tell people how good his rods are. That's my job. But yeah, we have retailed cane rods in we've exported a few. America, there's an instructor at the Golden Gate Casting Club uses one. There's one or two internationally known names who use one. And we must be doing something about right, I reckon. We did a rule of thumb packet. We reckon about 70 to 80% of our clients for our limestone rods are repeat customers, which kind of means we're doing something right, I think. But when we go out, they are tested. They are good rods. They're well made. Interest declared. They cast just nice, and he does do a nice rod. We've been playing about for the past 2 or 3 years with hollow built rods now. It's been very, very slow to take up the hollow built challenge. It is a challenge for a rod maker. I'm not a rod builder. I've not got those skills. Very few people have. But particularly the hollow built in the shorter lengths. We draw a line at about 8 feet long. I think an 8-foot cane rod is a nice length, but anything above that, it tends to act against you, I think, a little bit. But we do enjoy fishing them. We do enjoy casting them. I do a few demonstrations with them, showing something. So we're at the BWFI each year. Our corner of it turns into a little corner of Derbyshire, I think. All the Derbyshire faces turn on. And it's a place to go and cast a fine cane rod on a windswept and icy, horrible, bitterly cold February day, usually, on grass too. But we, people come, they are interested in them. We build them. We have one or two in stock, but mostly they're built by order. And they are increasingly popular. We think they're a joy to fish with. As I say, interest declared. We cast them differently, though, to a carbon. The theory is, as you know, with a carbon rod, we try to use the acceleration to load the rod, but and the line dominates a carbon rod, but with a cane rod, we try to let the mass of the rod dominate the line. It's a different feel. It's we try to call it gentleman's casting rather than anything else. Yeah, and they're quite popular.
Lovely. Yes, they're lovely. And Peter's too modest to say, so I will. They're called Arfield and French. So go check them out as well. And as I said, I've been lucky. My friend Warren has one, and I've had the pleasure of fishing and casting it. And it is a beautiful, beautiful rod too. So we're going to move on a little bit, Peter, and we've talked about tackle, and I think you're really well placed to answer this. Can you give me a piece of tackle that you would put in your Hall of Fame, your favourite rod? Let's centre on rods. What is your Hall of Fame rod that you must have cast many, many rods over the years? Which one's your favourite? And which one would you put in the Hall of Fame?
Ignoring the cane rods I've got, and I've got lovely rods from one or two makers. I've got the honour to have a Winston hollow build 2-piece from the 70s, Mike Brooks, and our limestone rods. In carbon rod, two lovely rods are outstanding for me. One was the first pot rod I ever bought, and I got it in about 93. It's a Winston 2-piece, IM6, 9 foot for a 4. Very nice, smooth, slow action. That's a nice rod. And a couple of years later, I got an 8'8" G series from Scott, again for a 4-weight. Nice sort of rod. So I've got other rods as well. As a workman's light rod, a Vision Onky is in my guiding quiver. That's a nice all-round rod. Want to put in somebody's hand as a guide. So I've usually got one of those in the back of the truck. And I've had one or two Hardys and still got them, but for my own personal use, apart from the bamboos, there's sometimes you need a carbon rod. This time of year, a carbon rod is better than a cane rod. I think the Winston and the Scott are pretty good, particularly good, I think. Maybe they just put my style of casting.
Good choices.
You're familiar with them then? You're nodding and smiling there.
I know the G2 8'8" 4-weight.
Yes.
Yep, the G2 8'8" 4-weight. I had that, and it
You've
was
got
a
one?
beautiful, beautiful rod.
Well, readers, he's nodding and smiling.
I had one. Yeah, I know, and it seems to me as though you go for feel in a rod as well, and those rods are particularly the G. I don't know the Winston as well, but the G2 had so much feel in it.
Yeah. Yes, proper rod.
Okay, well, we've spoken well over an hour, and the last question I have for you is music. Do you have a song that perhaps you're going to guide, perhaps you're going to go fish yourself somewhere or other, that is on in the car before you go? Is there a favourite song that you have that you'd like to give me that I can add to our playlist?
It was, I've not played it for a long time, but it's still in my mind. It was back in the day. It was The Poacher. Was it Steve Marriott, Small Faces? Went down to the river. There I found a poacher.
One last thing before we go. How can people find you? What are your social media handles and names? Where can people find you on Instagram and Facebook and things like that?
Arfield and French are on Instagram. And there's a Facebook called Bakewell Fly Fishing Shop. And I think you probably find the links to the odd video that I've done on Bakewell Fly Fishing Shop. But they've been scattered about over the years. So if you just look up Bakewell Fly Fishing Shop or Pete fishes a cane rod or Pete casts a rod on the Y, sort of nonsense on the YouTube, they'll pop up here and there if you want to find them. But my email address is Bakewell detract@gmail.com. That's probably the best way to reach me. There's an old landline number about for the shop, but that's about to close down now. It's been ringing an empty shop for a couple of years, as I've just discovered in my New Year tidy up. So I'm going to close that down on account it no longer seems to work for me. But yeah, Bakewell gmail.com will reach me, or you'll find me if you hunt around.
Lovely job. Well, fantastic. Well, Peter, I'm so pleased we got the opportunity to speak. And I think we've only scratched the surface, so there's probably another one in here somewhere or other. But it's been an absolute pleasure, as always, to be able to talk to you. And I'd like to say a massive thank you for coming along to talk with me on the Fly Culture podcast today.
That's all right. Thank you very much.
Well, everyone, that is another episode of the Fly Culture podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this episode as much as me. It's been a wonderful conversation with Peter. And as always, we try really, really hard to make these conversations different and, most importantly, free-flowing. So we had some rough questions, but we haven't stuck to those at all. So it's been wonderful to catch up with him. There'll never be any charge for these. It's just wonderful to talk to people like Peter who have been around fly fishing for a number of years now. So I'd just like to say a massive thank you for listening to this episode of the Fly Culture podcast. And as ever, there's going to be plenty more coming very, very soon. Thank you so much for listening.
The Fly Culture podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly published magazine owned and run by fly anglers. When it comes to fly fishing, we've got you covered.